Hi everyone, I'm Fred Pullen on the browser marketing team. With me is Prem Mathialagan, who is on the engineering team. We also have Jatinder Mann on the engineering team. And some other folks may be trickling in later. So we absolutely want to address all the questions you have. But as I said just before, please do hold your questions until the end, because I promise we're going to be answering a lot of questions throughout the next hour or so, just through the course of the presentation. We do have 6 different sessions at Microsoft Ignite. I have a slide towards the end that puts these in chronological order for those of you attending this week here in Chicago. But we also wanted to put these in order by topic. Tomorrow morning at 9 a.m., I'm going to be doing a session on enterprise web browsing that will really take it from the top. What is our guidance for enterprise customers, not just for Windows 10, but also on Windows 7 today? We'll also talk a lot about upgrading to Internet Explorer 11. That's a common theme because, of course, we're coming up on January 12, 2016, when support for older versions of Internet expire. So Internet Explorer 11 will be the only browser supported, only Internet Explorer version supported on Windows 7 after January 12, 2016. The good news is we have lots of resources that can help you upgrade more easily than before. I'm just curious, how many of you are already deploying IE 11 in your environments? OK, probably about half, maybe a little more. We also have this session and one other talking about Microsoft Edge. We have a session on Windows 10 browser management that will go into a little more detail on how you manage Internet Explorer and Microsoft Edge side by side. Some of the group policies or MDM policies that you can use to manage the browser and how those two can work hand in hand. And then finally, I have a security session that I'll be doing. I don't want to oversell this. This is a browser security overview. So it's a very high level, 100 level, maybe 200 level session that will talk about security 101, essentially. So lots of different sessions, lots of content here at Build, and we also have an all-day workshop on Thursday to help you troubleshoot web app compat issues. So if you have web apps that don't seem to be compatible with Internet Explorer 11, please do come by that workshop. I'll show you where that is and give you more details on that a little bit later. But today, right now, we're here to talk about Microsoft Edge and why this is a great time for a new browser. Microsoft Edge enables new experiences on the web, experiences that sit over and above just being a great web browser. It's powered by a completely new web engine, Edge HTML. We also have made sure that it works really well with Internet Explorer 11 to provide backward compatibility. And I'll go into a lot more detail, but I think the question on everybody's mind immediately when they hear that Microsoft has a new browser is, can I still use IE 11? Absolutely. Internet Explorer 11 is supported on Windows 7, Windows 8.1, and Windows 10 to give you a consistent platform across those operating systems. We also have made sure that Internet Explorer 11 works hand in hand with Microsoft Edge. Microsoft Edge can fall back to Internet Explorer 11. I'll be talking about that a little more in this session and a lot more in the browser management session that is Wednesday morning. So what we're going to cover in the next hour is I'm going to talk about Microsoft Edge, the browser itself, and we'll also be covering the Edge HTML web engine. So this isn't just an agenda. This is actually an architectural slide. The architecture of Microsoft Edge and applications that use the web engine both sit on top of the new Edge HTML web engine. So I'll talk about the browser itself, which is to say the frame and the features that sit on top of just rendering websites. I'll talk about the Edge HTML engine and how it renders websites, why we decided to split from Trident, from the legacy engine in Internet Explorer. And we'll also talk a little bit about web apps. Now, I'm not a developer. I'm an IT pro like most of you. But we do have some developers here. So if you have some deep developer questions, we can likely answer those as well. Let's go ahead and get started. So to give you some context on why Microsoft decided to create a completely new browser, we have to do a little bit of a history lesson. Internet Explorer launched in August 20 years ago. And so 20 years ago, Microsoft had been asked by customers to create web browsers that really had a lot of functionality that didn't exist yet on the web. There were no standards for the things customers like you were asking us to do. So we created a lot of technology in earlier versions of our browser, even as recently as IE5, IE6, IE7, and IE8, that at the end of the day became proprietary functionality. Things like ActiveX controls. So very early on, we had introduced web standards like HTML4, ECMAScript 3, CSS2, but we also introduced extensibility like ActiveX controls. We also supported lots of what are now considered legacy technologies. And the web sat for a long time on Internet Explorer 6. The web had really, and especially for line of business web applications, a lot of line of business web applications were designed for Internet Explorer 6 because we had a lot of great functionality in that browser. But it was stagnant. There wasn't a lot of competition. Now, some browsers like Firefox came along and spurred competition. They started really coming out with new standards, new ways of doing things that were more readily adopted by W3C, ECMA International, and other standards bodies. And so in response, we did have a response in Internet Explorer 7 and Internet Explorer 8. Internet Explorer 8 was our first browser to include some HTML5 standards, for example. But other people didn't sit still either. There were other browsers that came out that really created a good competitive environment. And in response to that, we rewrote the browser from the ground up in IE9 to create a truly modern standards-based browser in IE9 and then IE10 and IE11 to expand our support for modern standards. We now include in IE11 HTML5, SVG, CSS3, WebGL, et cetera, et cetera. Lots of support for great modern standards. But along the way, we've had to have all of our legacy baggage with us. There are still a lot of applications out there that were designed for older versions of Internet Explorer. And so that's really handicapped us a little bit because we've had to carry that with us. We've had to drag those applications with us. We realize that IT is generally a cost center. So if you can use backward compatibility for these applications, you're going to. This is why internally, there are a few customers who've chosen to share their web environments with us. And what we've found is that the customers who choose to share this with us have taught us that the vast majority of intranet web apps are actually designed for IE5 standards. So we know that we have to provide this backward compatibility, but we also need to be competitive with other browsers. We need to be competitive with other ecosystems. And it's not just the browser that's moving forward. There are other app ecosystems as well. There are application ecosystems out there that we need to stay current with. Of course, computing has changed as well. It's not just supporting mobile and PC anymore. Now we need browsers on just about every device that's out there. You expect to have a browser on your gaming console. You expect to have a browser on your Surface Hub, on your HoloLens, on wearables and Internet of Things. We need to be able to experience computing across a wide variety of devices. Customers and users also have changing expectations. So over time, we become a much more mobile environment. We expect to be able to work anywhere on any device. I realized on the plane, as I was flying into Chicago, I had a problem accessing the website. It said it wasn't compatible. I was able to quickly troubleshoot that, and I'll be going into a lot more detail in our enterprise mode deep dive on how you can troubleshoot these issues, and we'll get it fixed for the airline. But I realized I had a tablet, 2 computers, and 2 phones with me. So we live in a world now where you probably have 2 devices or 1 device on you right now that has more computing power than you ever had before just a few years ago. We're also always online. Our kids will probably never know a time when they're not able to connect to the internet. That's why we go camping. It's also smarter and more personal. People expect to have a more integrated personal experience. I want my phone to know my location so that when I glance at it, it will tell me what the weather's like outside, so I can avoid looking out the window. We expect that. It's a quid pro quo. I've chosen to share some information with my computing environment, and in return, my computing environment reminds me of things like when my next appointment is, or whether my flight is delayed. And this is something we've come to expect from our computing environment. Of course, along the way, we've changed how we input and how we interact with devices. Now we expect to be able to use voice. We expect to be able to use a pen, a variety of ways of inputting information. We also expect that we're not always going to be connected to power. And in fact, that it may be the norm not to be connected rather than the exception. And along the way, of course, security and privacy has become increasingly important. I think about 15 years ago, we realized that instead of leaving everything open and just locking down the things that you needed to lock down everything and just open up the things that you had to. And that's evolved over time. We now, and I'll be doing a lot more details on how browser security has evolved over the last 15 years or so in my security session. These are some of the reasons why we really needed to break from the past. The legacy Internet Explorer document modes were holding us back. Customers have new expectations about web experiences and what they expect from devices. And we really had to make a clean break. At the same time, we recognize how important backward compatibility is, which is why IE 11 is consistent on Windows 7, Windows 8.1, and Windows 10. We don't want to have changes across those versions because there's a reason Internet Explorer 8 was so popular. Internet Explorer 8 was the only version of Internet Explorer that was supported on Windows XP and on Windows 7. So many of you standardized on IE 8 as you moved from Windows XP to Windows 7. We're hoping that now that you're moving up to IE 11, it will help ease your transition up to Windows 10. But that only addresses half the equation. That only addresses really the legacy web, the web as it exists today. Over time, you're going to want the kind of experiences on the kind of devices that Windows 10 can light up. You're going to want a browser like Microsoft Edge. So this is why Microsoft Edge differentiates by being the browser for doing. We're trying to differentiate on productivity. Another way to say this is, in a world where any modern browser should be able to render your websites just as well as any other browser, how do we stand out? Edge will be the only browser with built-in Cortana to get more done on the web. It's the only browser with built-in offline reading, with built-in note-taking and sharing, and I'll be showing you some of those features in a few minutes. So there's a lot of excitement now about not just rendering a website really well, but what are the experiences I can light up over and above my website? All right, let's look at a video. And the audio is not working. Just a minute. I spent 15 years as an IT pro, and I can figure out if it's plugged into the wrong jack. I still have that much. Little applause, right? Come on. Clearly, this is not your father's browser. This is going to be exciting. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and jump into a demo now. And switch devices over here. So I always like to explain my demonstration environment, especially for a technical audience like this. No smoke or mirrors. This is the Windows 10 Enterprise Insider Preview. So this is the regular technical preview that you can get, but it's the Enterprise version. No difference, though, for what I'm going to be showing you now. And you can see on the taskbar here, we have both the Microsoft Edge icon. Actually, it is the Spartan icon, because it hasn't been updated yet for Microsoft Edge. And we also have Internet Explorer. So you can run the two side by side, no problem with that. And in fact, Microsoft Edge will fall back to Internet Explorer as needed if you configure it to do so for sites on your intranet, for example, or for sites on your enterprise mode site list. And we'll be going into a lot more detail on this during the administration management section. So let's go ahead and fire up Microsoft Edge. There we go. You notice that the user interface is pretty clean, pretty intuitive. Generally, people now understand what a back button, a forward button, or a refresh button look like. They understand what a toolbar is. They know they can type in a toolbar to see searches. We also have some additional icons over on the right there. We have you can easily add a favorite site just with a single click there. We can also go to a hub that shows my favorites. It shows my reading list, so I can log things for later and be able to capture those for later viewing. I also have my browsing history and downloads in the hub there. And then temporarily, we also have feedback and reporting. I think it's temporary. That's temporary, right? Or will this be something that we carry forward into production? I think the goal is to keep it. Excellent. So the idea here is we should make it as easy as possible for you to give us ongoing feedback about how we're doing so that we can continue to make the browser better. I think this is an important distinction. May as well talk about it here, is that Microsoft Edge is more like software as a service. Internet Explorer 11, by being consistent across Windows 7, Windows 8.1, and Windows 10, is considered software as a product, especially for customers who may have risk-averse or a dependency on some really important, critical line of business applications. It may make sense to continue using Internet Explorer for backward compatibility for those applications. Microsoft Edge is more like software as a service, always up to date, and it will have an engine that's kept up to date as well. We rely on your feedback as well as telemetry and other information to continue making improvements to the browser. All right, now there's some things I wanted to show you here. One is a smart address bar. So you may have seen some of these demos, but if I start to type in weather in Chicago, cloudy 73, or I can look out the window if I find one. We can also start to type in stock, MSFT, Microsoft stock, down a few pennies. But obviously, what we're trying to do here is make it easier for you to find the information that you care about without having to go to a website, without having to navigate through that website and find the right place. We can pull the information out, especially if you've chosen to share information with Cortana, because it just gets better from here. For example, if Cortana knows that I have a flight on Friday, if I start to type in the web address of the airline, it will immediately tell me what the flight status is. Without having to go to the web page, without having to navigate through the web page and figure out what the right page is, without having to enter my information, it's quid pro quo. I've chosen to share some information with Cortana, and Cortana is now watching out for me and exposing this information in a much easier, more delightful way. Interestingly, I hope my kids don't discover this, but we can do math problems as well. 1, 2, 3 plus 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yeah, so Cortana will continue to evolve over time just as the browser evolves over time. We'll continue to expand the functionality. But a lot of this is based on popular Bing searches. So for example, one of the demos is I can say, how old is Brad Pitt? 51 years old. Apparently that's a popular search. All right. Now, some other functions that I wanted to show you here, just briefly, is Cortana Assist. So if I'm on a website, for example, QuocoSeattle.com, this is a restaurant. Now, you notice I've got directions, hours, and more, and you see the little bouncing Cortana icon. It's a very discoverable feature for new users. If I happen to go to a website that supports it, I can click on the Cortana icon, and it pulls up directions, it pulls up a map, it pulls up hours. I can book a reservation at OpenTable in this case, and so on. So it makes it very easy for me to use the browser, for me to interact with the browser. I don't know if you're like I am, but generally when I start my day, I have a clean slate. I start with a clean desktop, and over the day, I add tabs. I might open a tab for this, open a tab for that, open a tab for the other. By the end of the day, I have 20 or 30 open tabs. Using Cortana means that I don't have to open as many tabs. I can get much more done in a single tab. I can look up information. For example, if I'm on MSN, actually, let's go to TechNet. So I'm going to the TechNet webpage, and I'm curious about something. There's this thing called Internet Explorer. I can right-click and ask Cortana. So Cortana is able to immediately pull up information about Internet Explorer from Microsoft, from Wikipedia, from a number of different sources. So it makes it easier than ever before for me to find out information about Internet Explorer, about maybe competitor browsers, lots of information there. But this makes it easier because I don't have to exit this particular page. When I'm done, I can simply click and it goes away. So it's easier for me when I'm doing research to find information. Now let's go to the TechNet homepage. I know there were some announcements this week. And let's find out some more information maybe about some of the Windows announcements. So it looks like we're celebrating Star Wars Day. May the 4th be with you. And we also have an announcement from Terry Myerson announcing Windows Update for Business. So if I find something that's of interest to me in this article and I want to share it with other people, I can click on this WebNote feature, and I can easily mark this up and say, here's this, look this up, find out more information about this, because this is relevant for me. And I can share this with people who not only use Microsoft Edge, but I can also choose to share it with people who don't use Microsoft Edge. I can choose to share this in email. I can choose to make a screen clipping. So it's very easy for me to just simply say, you know what, I'm interested in grabbing some content here. Let's go ahead and I should use a mouse. There we go. So let's grab some of this information. I can also annotate, if I'm not on a device that uses a pen, I can easily click and make a web note like this. So I can say, this bit is interesting. Yeah, if I could type. This is interesting. So it's very easy for me to annotate web pages. Think about how easy this would make things like testing line of business applications. Your end user, if they're familiar with this feature, could easily annotate something and say, this isn't quite what I meant. Can you move this over here? Can you make this fall below this line? Maybe the business logic is a bit off. Maybe we need to go to this field or take this step before we go to this step. It's very easy for me to annotate these pages and then share this information out. I can also save it locally. So I have the choice of saving or sharing. All right, a couple other things I wanted to show here. And I should mention, by default, Microsoft Edge is going to be more secure. And I'll mention this a little bit later, but it's going to be more secure because it doesn't carry with it all the legacy of Internet Explorer 11, ActiveX controls, support for Java, support for other Windows binaries. We do have support built in and extensibility for JavaScript extensions and HTML extensions. So you will be able to extend the browser, but we want to constrain how it's extended. Now, there are a couple exceptions to this. We do have Flash built into the browser. We also have a PDF viewer built right into the browser. I can't tell you how many people I've talked to who have installed a PDF viewer or what they thought was Flash, and they came to find out that it either wasn't the PDF viewer they were looking for, and it reset their home page and their search engine and a lot of other things, or maybe it came with spyware or malware. Ditto for downloading Flash or anything else. There's obviously a danger in giving your users local administrative control, or even at home, anybody downloading anything that they want to. So by having built-in support for Flash, by having built-in support for PDFs, we're hoping that you don't need to extend the browser and get a lot more other things that used to come with it. All right. There's another thing I wanted to show you here, and that's we do have support for F12 developer tools. Those will evolve over time, but I realize this isn't a developer audience, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that. I did want to show you the settings. It's very clean. Some of you may remember the settings page in Internet Explorer and Internet Explorer 11. Lots of settings, lots of group policies. Internet Explorer has over 1,600 group policies. Microsoft Edge is a much cleaner browser. Lightweight management and easier to set the settings. There's another thing here also as well. If I go into my favorites, I've got a couple of sites set here. So one of the things I wanted to share was Reading View. You may go to a website that's very cluttered, or you may be on a smaller device that doesn't support the way the website lays out its web pages. So if I'm looking at a particular page that's of interest to me, I can click on the Reading View icon. And it makes it very easy. I can customize this to a certain degree on the size of fonts, sometimes the background. And it makes it much easier for me on a smaller device. So if I'm on an 8-inch tablet or if I'm on a Windows phone, it makes it very easy for me to get to the content that I care about without a lot of the clutter on the page. All right, and as I mentioned before, you can run Internet Explorer side by side. So you can have an experience that includes both Microsoft Edge and Internet Explorer 11. All right, let's switch back to slides. And like I said, I know that many of you have questions. We will get to your questions at the end of the session, I promise. But in summary, Microsoft Edge is built for Windows 10. It's built on the universal platform, always up to date. It'll be updated frequently, just as Windows 10 will be. And as I mentioned before, it'll be manageable through group policy and mobile device management and MDM. So you can use MDM CSPs if that's what you choose how to manage your environment, or you can use your existing group policy infrastructure. And we will be going into a lot more detail during the browser management session Wednesday morning. It's also ready for the future. As I mentioned before, it's free from a lot of the legacy baggage of Internet Explorer 11. Built on top of modern security protections, it's 64-bit processes, not 64-bit by default, but 64-bit period. It uses enhanced protected mode, and it uses app container for sandboxing. Not by default, but period. You can't switch out of enhanced protected mode. Now, there's a lot of good news there, because we've known for years that we can make Internet Explorer 11 much more secure at the cost of compatibility. We can have an IE11 environment that's locked down and is very, very secure, relatively secure compared with not locking it down. But the cost is compatibility with your ActiveX controls, compatibility with your line of business applications. Now we have an answer for this, and it's really least privileged security model. Use Internet Explorer 11 for the sites that need it, and you can use Microsoft Edge for surfing the web at large. And I'll be talking about this in a lot more detail in my session on browser security. But you have a lot of choices here. You can choose to use Internet Explorer 11 and standardize on that. You don't even have to use Microsoft Edge. You can use Microsoft Edge and fall back to Internet Explorer 11 for the sites that need it. Or you can just use Microsoft Edge. Let's talk next about the Edge HTML web engine. So the underlying engine that powers Microsoft Edge is also new. And we wanted to give you a sense of why we chose to create a new engine, what that will get you. As I've said before, the trade-off here is interoperability with the modern web, that's with sites designed for other devices, other ecosystems, other browsers, and providing backward compatibility with existing line of business web applications. It's a conflict. Customers want sites to just work that were written years and years ago, but at the same time, they also want the modern web to just work. And this was a technical conundrum. How do we provide really bulletproof backward compatibility, but at the same time make sure that we're interoperable with the modern web? Now, on the desktop, this is pretty well understood today. On the desktop, by and large, most sites should just work in any modern browser, including Internet Explorer 11. But this problem really comes to the forefront in mobile browsers. Different mobile browser ecosystems have come to the forefront over time. And Microsoft learned our lesson years ago about bringing in proprietary standards. We didn't want to create new standards in our browser that weren't broadly accepted by W3C or ECMA International or other standards bodies. So as a result, we chose, as a matter of principle in Internet Explorer, not to include things like WebKit extension support. Put a different way, there are a lot of websites out there that were designed for an iPad, and they handle an iPad drop-down menu just fine. But that's considered a proprietary method. So as a matter of principle in Internet Explorer, we said, you know what, we've learned our lesson. We don't want to go down that path. We don't want to create support for standards that aren't really standards. And as a result, we weren't compatible with a lot of sites out there. The good news is, in Microsoft Edge and Edge HTML, we've learned our lesson. Now our focus is on interoperability. But the only way to do that, to preserve compatibility and interoperability with the modern web, was to fork the code, to create a new branch, Microsoft Edge, or Edge based on Edge HTML, that's different from the legacy Trident engine, that's different from the web engine of the past. Now, to walk you through this, this is an architectural diagram a little bit, and it explains some of the capabilities of what used to be our Trident engine, or what is our Trident engine, mshtml.dll, which is used for Internet Explorer. Today, on Internet Explorer, this Trident engine is used for both interoperability with the public and modern web and for legacy compatibility. The way that we've done this over time is to create different document modes. As I mentioned before, we had a set of proprietary functionality in IE 5, 5.5, 6, IE 7, IE 8, IE 9, 10, 11. Each time we came out with a new browser, we essentially had to fork the code and create a new document mode. Well, over time, this becomes less and less tenable. There are applications that clearly are written to use these document modes, but it makes it much more difficult for us to support the modern web. Internet Explorer 11 used this method for everything, though. It said, you know what, if you're a public-facing web, I'm going to use IE 11, or what we then called Edge mode. And if you're an intranet site, we're going to use whatever the intranet site needs to use, including enterprise mode, which is higher fidelity emulation for older versions of IE. And this obviously made sure that we were compatible with ActiveX controls, binary extensions, Java, anything that was written to support IE11 or Internet Explorer over the years was supported in IE11. We wanted to make sure we had really good backward compatibility. Windows 10 is a little different. So in Windows 10, we now have 2 browsers and 2 browsing engines that support those browsers. The browsing engine for Microsoft Edge is Edge HTML, and it's only available today on Windows 10, but it provides great interoperability with the modern web. It has an up-to-date web engine. It'll receive updates on a regular basis. And as I mentioned before, it's software as a service for modern websites. It's not like software as a product. It's software as a service, just as other modern browsers are today, that get more frequent iterative updates. And because it doesn't have the backward compatibility of IE11, it's much more secure. Internet Explorer 11, by comparison, still exists, still available for Windows 7, Windows 8.1, and Windows 10. Rumors of IE11's demise are significantly exaggerated. It will be supported for the life of Windows 7, Windows 8.1, and Windows 10. But over time, it's going to be used more and more for legacy applications, for backward compatibility. This is software as a product. And I've talked to a lot of customers from regulated industries, from financial services, pharmaceutical companies, airlines who have said, we can't, let me rephrase that, it's more difficult for us to adopt software as a service. We're risk averse. We'd much rather have an application environment that remains consistent over time, that gets security updates and maybe compatibility fixes, but isn't treated like software as a service. So that's why Internet Explorer 11 will remain consistent for the broadest number of Windows desktops. And obviously, it errs on the side of compatibility. Now, to date, in the Edge HTML engine, we have made a lot of interoperability improvements. We continue to improve this. We're continuing to move this number. So we're looking at this, and we have scanning engines that go across millions of URLs across the modern web to see the patterns and practices and web standards that are actually in use on those sites. Now we support things like the iPad drop-down menu. Now we support WebKit extensions. Now we support lots of things that before now we would have said, you know what, that's proprietary to that ecosystem or that device. We don't want to do that. Now we're saying, look, we recognize that customers just want a web browser to work. The web browser should just work. So as I said before, any modern browser should be able to render your website just as well as any other browser. How do we differentiate then? That's where we start to look at Microsoft Edge's features like web notes, being able to mark up a web page, having Cortana integration, having reading view, having the features that sit over and above just being a great web browser. Now, if you are curious about the new standards support that we're bringing into the browser, you can go to status.modern.ie and learn about the standards that are either already in the browser, in Internet Explorer, or in Microsoft Edge. We also have information about the standards that are under consideration or under active development for the next major browser. So we're introducing a lot of support for new things in Microsoft Edge, and this will continue to evolve over time. It's a little challenging from my perspective because we can't say on any given day, this is it, this is Microsoft Edge, this is what we're giving customers, because it's going to evolve over time. As you give us feedback and you say, this would be nice, this would be interesting, you need to fix this, we're going to continue to iterate on this. We're going to continue to make it better. And we're not going to create more document modes. In Edge HTML, there's one document mode, and it will be updated over time, just as other browsers do today. So we're not going to get ourselves into the problem that we had with Internet Explorer. The net result, though, is how well does it work? And what we're finding, based on your feedback, is it's starting to work pretty well. Now Microsoft Edge is getting better and better at rendering websites. I want to be sure you understand, though, today, Microsoft Edge is a work in progress. This is a preview release. So if you go to your favorite website and it doesn't work for whatever reason, do let us know using the feedback mechanism. But expect that there will continue to be a lot of fixes over time, not just up until general availability sometime this summer, but after that as well. We'll continue to make the engine better and better that powers the Microsoft Edge web browser. Now, I just had a quick demo I wanted to show you here, and I'm going to switch over to my demo machine because I wanted to show you a quick thing. And I'm just going to pull up what is myuseragent.com. And really, I just wanted to show you this. So this is the default IE11 engine, or IE11 user agent string. Basically, when you go to a website, the website can use something called user agent string sniffing to say, what version of browser are you? Now, this is not a good modern practice. The best practice today is to do feature detection, to say, do you support touch, for example. But there are a lot of websites out there that will check for the browser. And we realized in IE11 we have great support for modern standards, but they were sometimes falling down because the website would say, what version of browser are you? It would hear IE11 and it would say, oh, Internet Explorer, I know how to handle you. Let me give you Internet Explorer 7 markup. And it would work fine in other browsers. It would work fine in Chrome or Firefox or Safari, but it would fall down in Internet Explorer because they were using browser detection. We tried to get around that by saying, like Gecko. Gecko, of course, being the web engine for Firefox. And so we were trying to get around this. And this is an industry standard. It doesn't cause problems to say that you're a browser that you aren't necessarily. In fact, Mozilla hasn't shipped a browser, in this case, Mozilla 5 NT 6.3. This actually came from some of the earliest browsers, and I'm trying to remember. Jatinder, help me out. What's one of the earliest browsers that used the user agent strings?
Yeah.
Netscape Navigator. That's what I was trying to remember. Thank you, Jatinder.
No problem.
But now, by comparison, let's pull this up in Microsoft Edge using Edge HTML. What is myuseragent.com? Now we have Apple WebKit, like Gecko, Chrome, Safari, and Edge. Now, obviously, it's our hope that web developers won't do browser detection. But if they are doing browser detection, we want them to think that we're just like any other modern browser, because that's what we're aiming for. So I just wanted to show this briefly because this is the aim. We're not trying to be different in this regard, at least, from other browsers. Our aim with the Edge HTML engine is to be as interoperable as possible because we're differentiating in other ways, because we're differentiating by having great features that sit over and above being a great web browser. All right, let's switch back. Next, let's talk about web apps. So there are applications that rely on the Edge engine as well, not just the web browser, but applications that can use the web engine in a variety of ways. Last week at Build, we shared some great information about Universal Windows apps and the Universal Platform that supports not just Windows 32 and .NET applications, not just web applications, but also makes it easier for you to package up Android or iOS applications and provide those to your Windows customers. Now, in this context, we'll be talking about the web, but if this is interesting to you, there's a lot of content that came out of last week's sessions at Build. So it may be worth going into. Now, for the web, there are a few different ways of using the engine. One is hosted web apps. And to make it clear, this is an application that essentially is just a single line of HTML. It's a pointer to your website. So the content may exist on your website. You may have already designed the site to work across a variety of devices, across a mobile device, a tablet, laptop, desktop. You can make the experience even better by using feature discovery for Windows APIs. So for example, on your website, you could say, if you're accessing this website using a Windows device, here's the ability to add a calendar item, or here's the ability to interact with Windows in some way. No change to your web workflow, no change to your business logic. Everything should just work. So in this example, this is simply a wrapper. It's a universal app published in the Windows Store that is a wrapper for your website. So you now have an application that essentially is a wrapper around your website. You don't have to update the application. You can update your website, and those changes will be reflected for your users. And as I said before, you can feature detect Windows to add functionality like being able to add an appointment. Make it very easy. There's another way that you can add this kind of feature and functionality to your applications. One is we do have a new web view control. You may know there are some applications that are Windows binaries, but they use a web control to be able to render web content. For example, there are many Windows binaries that will actually use the web control to render things like graphics or render things that they're pulling from the internet. So we have a new rendering engine, and we're able to use that through a new web control. We also have better support for packaged web apps. Now, this is the situation where not only are they using a control to render the application, to render some of the features, but they also are sending out the HTML or dynamically creating that HTML locally on that machine. Think a help file or something. If you have an application that uses help files, maybe the help files are actually HTML files that are packaged and sent out as part of that application. There are some line of business applications that use this kind of functionality heavily. If you happen to work in the healthcare industry, there are some healthcare solution providers that use this kind of functionality to provide local or dynamic HTML files that are then rendered within a Windows x86 binary, within a Windows application. We now support that even better than ever before by having better security through content security policies. So this makes sure that there aren't applications that may inject HTML onto those pages, and then the HTML is rendered in the application. So this could be part of a defense in depth strategy, for example. So some takeaways. I know there are going to be lots and lots of questions, which is why we wanted to leave 20 or so minutes at the end for questions. But some takeaways here. We wanted to create a new browser in Microsoft Edge that provides you with the ability to create new experiences on top of the web. It's powered by a completely new rendering engine that will no longer fork the code every time we come up with updates. It's more like software as a service, more frequent iterative updates. By having Microsoft Edge and Internet Explorer 11 side by side, we want to have really great backward compatibility through IE11, but also interoperability with the modern web through Microsoft Edge and Edge to HTML that evolves over time. Microsoft Edge will ship with Windows 10 this summer, but you can absolutely start trying it now. It will get better over time. Please do report websites that you encounter problems with, but this will continue to evolve. So some next steps. We announced last week we're going to be creating a new blog for Microsoft Edge, so please do follow that blog. I think the URL should be published this week. We also suggest that you upgrade to Internet Explorer 11 if you haven't already, because upgrading to IE11 on Windows 7 can help unblock your Windows 10 migration so that you can access Microsoft Edge sooner. And obviously, evaluate the Windows 10 technical preview. Send us your feedback. There are a few resources that we suggest for Microsoft Edge, TechNet, MSDN. For modern standard support, if you have developers who are updating sites for modern standards, we suggest they go to modern.ie and the new MSDN blog for Microsoft Edge. As I mentioned before, we have 6 different sessions at Microsoft Ignite. We also have on Thursday a drop-in app compat troubleshooting session. So if you didn't raise your hand earlier, you're still on IE9, IE8, IE10, you're having web application compatibility issues, feel free to bring your laptop to the room N135, and we can help you troubleshoot those applications. Engineers are standing by. So we absolutely wanted to do this. And just to give you a sense, we did this in Redmond a few months ago. There were no web app issues that we weren't able to solve with enterprise mode for backward compatibility. Now, knock on wood, I'm hoping that that's true on Thursday. But if it's not true, we want to find out enough information to be able to file some bugs and continue to improve our backward compatibility in our backward compatibility story. All right, so I'm going to leave this slide up for a little bit, and let's go ahead and take some questions. And we do have some members of our engineering team. Dean King-Smith joined us as well. So we have some members of engineering here who can likely address your questions. And please go ahead and start. Please use a microphone because these are being recorded and streamed. So we want to make sure that everyone's able to hear your questions. And thank you very much for your time. Thank you. All right, looks like we have a question over there. Yes, sir.
So how good does it plug and play with SharePoint, and which versions of SharePoint?
That's a great question. How good is the plug and play with SharePoint? It depends on the version of SharePoint. Certainly, we recommend Internet Explorer 11 today for SharePoint environments in production. I think this will evolve over time. I'm looking at my engineering counterparts. We need to test with the latest version of SharePoint, but I would say for legacy versions of SharePoint, SharePoint 2007, SharePoint 2010, and even to a certain degree, SharePoint 2013, we recommend that you continue to use Internet Explorer 11.
And it's worth saying the latest version of SharePoint will work with Microsoft Edge. We're actively testing that.
Thank you.
To be able to use Cortana on Edge, do you need to log in with a Microsoft ID if you're an enterprise user?
If you're an enterprise user, do you need to log in with a Microsoft ID to be able to use Cortana?
I believe yes, but there are some fallback experiences when you don't have a Microsoft account hooked up where you get some of the functionality. But of course, it'll be truly personal when you have a Microsoft account that's hooked up.
So how do you use that for, I'm an enterprise user, and I want my users to get the full functionality of Edge, but I don't have a Microsoft ID, and I don't want them to log in with their Microsoft ID on their corporate machine.
Yeah, I believe, we need to test this, but I believe that you do get some Cortana functionality, but it's obviously not going to use your notebook interests. It's not going to be able to assess whether or not you have a plane ticket. It will be using Bing to provide some access to, if you've chosen to enable this functionality, it can share. So if I start to type in MSFT, it'll show me the stock price. If I've chosen to share my location, it will be able to look up weather. So it's a little more granular than simply having an on or off switch. I can choose to share my location, but not my other information, or choose not to share my location, but I can benefit from some aspects of Cortana.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Right now, I was wondering if anyone could talk about the direction for group policy. Right now we have the now deprecated Internet Explorer maintenance. There's Internet Explorer settings, if you can remember your F6 or F8 keys, and there's various places in group policy or even registry settings and group policy preferences. So where are we headed? I mean, as an endpoint admin, I would love to use regular group policies or group policy preferences that are laid out for this.
So I'm going to use your question as a great segue to a talk that I'm giving on Wednesday morning that's going to be talking about Windows 10 browser management all up. So we'll cover Internet Explorer 11 policy management. A little sneak peek, nothing changes. All of your existing policies that work within IE 11 on Windows 7 or Windows 8.1 carry over to Windows 10. As we think about managing Microsoft Edge, there's a different management story which we'll be talking about in depth on Wednesday. But that story does support both group policy and MDM-based management tooling.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, so on Internet Explorer, no change. Again, we want to make it consistent. Yes, question.
It seems like your browser, it seems like your browser and Cortina is collecting a lot of information. How can we be assured, or what's your privacy standards? For example, my company doesn't permit us to use Siri on our iPhone because it can collect business-sensitive data, and who knows what Apple does with it. How do you guys address that?
Yeah, absolutely. We will have very similar privacy mechanisms. So the essence of privacy is transparency and choice. So we want to make sure that organizations, individuals to large organizations, have the transparency to make the right choices. You'll be able to opt out of being able to share information like that. Yeah, so very similar. Let's rotate around the room. We have 6 different microphones here. Yes, sir.
When it comes to updating, are you going to break out your security updates and your feature updates? Because as you know now, in our day and age, every time we turn around, there's a new update. And the last couple months have been brutal when it comes to breaking things. So you're pushing us towards edge, which many of us would agree with. But are you going to break your security stuff out from maybe your feature updates or tweaks to the actual code?
Yeah, I'll take a stab at this one, and then engineering can tell me where I'm wrong. So the Microsoft Edge browser will receive updates automatically. But keep in mind, the browser is simply the frame around the web engine. Just as you do today in Internet Explorer, you receive updates for Internet Explorer 11 and the Trident engine, or MS-HTML, through Windows Update. The Edge HTML engine will also receive updates through Windows Update. So this will give you the opportunity to test for compatibility before you deploy an update for the engine itself. For the browser, which is to say the wrapper around it with Cortana integration and other great features, that will be updated more or less automatically. So, but you're asking about the distinction of features versus security updates. My understanding is no change from the way we do Internet Explorer 11 today, which is we have now included some minor updates, minor feature updates, such as enterprise mode, with our cumulative security updates.
And I'm going to assume this is all going to be compatible with SCCM and all the other enterprise level Apple programs we use to patch and secure the environment.
Absolutely true, yes.
Okay.
Now keep in mind, that's absolutely true for the Edge HTML engine. The plan is for Microsoft Edge to receive updates automatically, ultimately through the store.
And it's worth adding, in the Windows as a Service blog, in a blog post I went out earlier, we talked about there's a current branch, there's going to be a business branch. You can always look at the current branch to test your application, to see if there's breaking changes, give us feedback. So there'll be some delay between when the current branch goes to the business.
Yeah, let's go back to the back there.
So will we ever see Edge on earlier versions of Windows or iOS, Android platforms?
The current plan is to make sure that Microsoft Edge has a great browsing experience on Windows 10. All right, next question.
So we have about 200,000 endpoints, and we've got IE8 right now in the transition to 11. ME is great, but it also keeps intact some of those IE8 legacy approaches, right? So as we're looking forward, I'm curious, this is a strategy question about kind of that transition to Edge, right? So if we've got hundreds of applications, line of business applications that are critical to our business, where is Microsoft going, or what's your recommendation from that? Really get off the ME and get into the Edge, and have you guys had much discussion on what you're advising enterprise customers there?
No, that's a great question, and that's what I'm going to be focusing a lot of my session tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. on. Okay. But it's really that Internet Explorer 11 should be considered the lowest common denominator for a line of business web application experience today. Because if you think about it, Internet Explorer 11 is available on Windows 7, Windows 8.1, Windows 10 desktops across the board, a consistent interface for the broadest Windows desktop addressable market, essentially. So our guidance to ISVs, to line of business application vendors, to companies that create their own or manage their own applications is treat Internet Explorer 11 as the lowest common denominator. As you upgrade your applications to modern standards, ideally moving from IE11 Edge mode, or what we used to call Edge mode in IE11, the IE11 standard, up to Microsoft Edge shouldn't be that difficult. And there are many companies I talk to who, as a matter of course, have said, we will add your web application to the line of business application owner. We will add your line of business application to our enterprise mode site list, but you don't get on the enterprise mode list unless you have a plan for getting off of the enterprise mode list. And some companies have given their application owners a 2-year window or a 3-year window. But it's not a bad idea in terms of application lifecycle management to wrap your mind around what are the applications that are using IE5 document mode or IE7 document mode or IE8 document mode, and how quickly can we get up to modern standards? Is there a compelling ROI, or can we continue to use IE11 for backward compatibility?
It's going to keep going forward, right?
It keeps moving forward, yeah, but IE11 is consistent. So that's why we say IE11 is a great lowest common denominator experience across the board, Windows 7, 8.1, and Windows 10.
And as far as pulling the rug on ME with the compatibility, is that going to, I mean...
Plan is for that, for enterprise mode is a feature of Internet Explorer 11, and Internet Explorer 11 is supported for the life of Windows 7, Windows 8.1, and Windows 10. All right, in the back there, right in the middle here? Yes, sir.
He was here first.
Okay, okay.
So what's been the feedback, or what is your plan for, as you transition from IE11 to Edge, with dealing with all the other plugins like the Flashes and Javas and so on and so forth? Because right now, as we transition from IE8 to IE11, we've got to have a Flash plugin, a Flash installer for the Chrome and for IE and for whatever else, and just as an example. So as we transition to IE11 and also have the addition of Edge, are we going to have 2 different installers for 2 different browsers, one that's baked in the OS, like with 8.1 and the Flash player, and one that is browser specific? So what's been the feedback and the plans there?
Yeah, I've got some good news for you, because Microsoft Edge doesn't support Java, for example. It doesn't support ActiveX controls. So you can standardize your entire business on Internet Explorer 11 and continue to use IE11 on Windows 10. Microsoft Edge will be a much more fluid experience, and it doesn't have some of the risk associated with older technology. So what you can do is you can use the Flash that's built in, you can use the PDF viewer that's built in, you can use the extensibility that we'll be adding in terms of JavaScript or HTML extensions, but no binary extensions. Is that a good answer? Yeah. Okay. Yes, sir.
Yeah, so earlier you mentioned how Microsoft's learned their lesson and you are looking to support standards as they go forward. I've noticed that with regards to WebRTC and ORTC, the WebRTC spec is supported by all the other major browser manufacturers, and you guys are pushing ORTC despite the fact that on the website you have probably a 3-to-1 margin for people saying, hey, get WebRTC implemented. So I'm just wondering why you haven't even got out the gate yet and you're doing the same thing again.
Can you guys address that? Or?
Yeah, our goal is to be interoperable with the web. So in a lot of cases, like if you look at status.modern.ie, you can see a lot of the new standards we're working on, what's in development. But our goal generally is we want to support the standards that are being used publicly.
Okay.
So I don't actually have much to share about WebRTC right now. But
okay, well, that's
our goals,
something to take back, right? It's the standard that's out there today is being supported by everybody else, and you guys are breaking.
Yeah, and to be clear, like in the past, as Fred mentioned, we took a principled approach. This is what the spec says, and this is what we're going to define. In a lot of cases, browsers don't always follow the spec exactly. And our approach in the past was, no, this is what the spec has defined. This is what our test cases show. That's what we're going to develop. But what we found is a lot of the web developers aren't writing to standards. They're writing to a browser. Right, so we have to be more interoperable. So that's good feedback, and that's really our new principled approach. Given the standard and what all the other browsers do, we're going to follow what the browsers do, and maybe even improve the standard, make it better.
Okay. There's one other factor to consider too, and that's this is a moving train, right? It's evolving over time, and we were slow to catch the WebRTC train. So now we need to make sure that Microsoft Edge supports not necessarily what other browsers supported 2 years ago, but what other browsers are going to be supporting next year. So now we're trying to get on the train, but it's likely that we'll be at the next station and not where they were an hour ago. All right. Yes, sir.
I have the Windows 10 preview, and when I try to bring up our SharePoint 2010 shares through Get Explorer or Open with Explorer, doesn't work. So I think you pretty much explained why Edge won't work that way. But when I do it with Internet Explorer 11 on there, it also doesn't open. It says this browser doesn't support it. Is there going to be support for SharePoint 2010 in Internet Explorer 11 on Windows 10?
Yeah, so Internet Explorer 11 should support existing versions of SharePoint. There may be a bug. We should talk offline, see if we can
I
follow
noticed
up.
it worked with 2013, but not 2010.
Yeah, it works for us internally. That's why we were looking at each other quizzically. Please, if you do have a particular application, it may have been set in your environment to a different document mode. So if you do have a specific example of an application like that that's not working for you, please swing by on Thursday and we'll help you troubleshoot.
All right, thanks.
Yeah, question? Yes, sir.
Yes, will we be able to move the address bar in the Edge browser? I noticed in some of your screenshots for the mobile versions, it was up on the top. It would probably be better on the bottom.
So the way we've looked at the Spartan experience is Edge, yeah. In Microsoft Edge is that we want it to be very familiar and at the same time fit in well with the Windows 10 environment. So that's our current design. But of course, that's something that we're constantly looking feedback about how it's being used and see how we can improve further. So right now it's going to be at the top.
Okay, I mean, that's cool if it's on the top as the default, maybe just a little option for those of us that want to change it.
That is a great feedback. I don't have anything more to share right now, but we are constantly looking at how the experiences can be improved and be flexible, while at the same time be familiar and consistent with Windows 10. So, great.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Next question. Yes, sir.
Yeah, you mentioned that with Edge, there'll be somewhat, if the Edge browser connects with a site that is basically legacy, it'll fall back to 11. So what is the user experience going to be like? Is it going to close Edge and open 11, or is it going to be a seamless experience?
I'm going to use this as another opportunity to plug the management session on Wednesday. So there is a seamless experience which actually leverages the enterprise mode site list. So and IT pros and you will be able to manage how your endpoints transition between both browsers. And we'll have demos and we'll showcase a lot of this on Thursday. But there is an experience and there is a story there that will enable such that if you go to a site that requires a technology that's available in IE11, it'll automatically switch to IE11. IE11 will load and open that site.
Yeah, and it also is optional for intranet sites.
Yeah.
So you could say, just as a matter of course, we love Microsoft Edge. We'd like to start using it for public websites. But for our intranet, we're not quite sure. We don't want to test. Let's continue to use IE11 because we've already done that work.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
About vendor compatibility, I guess. Last year, we upgraded to IE10. When we tried to kind of push the envelope to go to 11, we found a lot of vendors of products we use wouldn't support 11 because they weren't there yet. What are you going to do to kind of try to push Edge out there for vendor support so that we get our hands kind of get forced as a business by something the vendor will dictate? Well, our app works best in Chrome. They try to push Chrome. What are you going to do there so Edge is kind of widely accepted pretty quickly?
No, that's a great question. So I'll address two parts of this, really. One is IE11. How is IE11 being supported? And the second is how are we going to really get line of business application vendors to support Edge and Edge HTML? On IE11, as I said before, IE11 is consistent across Windows 7, Windows 8.1, and Windows 10. After January, it'll be the only version supported on Windows 7. So clearly, the path forward for line of business application vendors is supporting IE11. And we've had a lot of support. We've done a lot of outreach to large line of business application vendors. This makes sense to them. Frankly, they were really frustrated with the fragmentation that we had on Windows 7. And many of you know, deciding which version of Internet Explorer to support on Windows 7 was increasingly difficult because you were asking us how soon before IE8, IE9, and IE10, and IE11, how soon before that becomes 5 versions, or 6 versions, or 7 versions? And line of business application vendors were telling us the same thing. How many versions do you realistically expect us to support? So the defragmentation of Internet Explorer 11 makes sense for a lot of line of business application vendors. To answer the other side of the question, how are we going to be promoting Microsoft Edge to those same line of business application vendors? If a vendor is supporting another browser today, then they should be able to more easily add support for Microsoft Edge. Again, the premise of Microsoft Edge and Edge HTML is interoperability. If it works with another browser, if it works with Chrome, Safari, Firefox, it should work with Microsoft Edge. That's one of our tenets. That's one of our principles. So if you think about it from a line of business application vendor standpoint, when they have to test against a browser, they don't want to have to invest a lot of resources in that. The good news and the promise that we're hoping to deliver is it doesn't require a lot of testing. If they've already done the testing for another browser, if they're already supported on another browser, then it should be easier for them to adopt Microsoft Edge. And given that Windows 10 is a free upgrade for consumers for the first year, we expect that there's going to be a very large base on Windows 10 in a relatively short amount of time. Thank you. Yes, sir.
I was just wondering, so what we find is that with enterprise mode, that I should say we're finding more and more websites that are not working with enterprise mode, but they work in compatibility mode, or compatibility view, so we're having to basically not be able to fully manage it that way. I'm wondering if you guys see a lot of that, or is it just kind of a rarity for us? And then the other thing I was wondering is a lot of mention of IE 11 being supported all throughout Windows 10. Are you thinking, or are you guys foreseeing that IE 11 is going to be the last version of IE, or are we going to see an IE 12 within like a year or 2 years?
Yeah, so two things. One is Internet Explorer is the last major version of Internet Explorer. On Windows 7 and Windows 8.1, I don't have anything to announce on Windows 10, but it'll be supported for the life of Windows 10. So yeah, that's the first thing, is Internet Explorer 11 is a common, consistent web application platform that you can continue to use for line of business applications across the board. The other, sorry, what was the first part of your question?
With enterprise mode.
Enterprise mode. Oh, yeah, compatibility view. So on Thursday morning, we're doing a session on enterprise mode deep dive. And what we're recommending is that you test document modes without enterprise mode first, because that gives you the best performance. And so enterprise mode should be considered a fallback. It's a much higher fidelity emulation for older versions of Internet Explorer, and we'll go into a lot more detail on Thursday. But it's not something that I'd start testing right out of the gate. I would start with IE 11 document mode, IE 10 document mode, and work your way down through compatibility view.
Yeah, it's worth adding that these are all just like a family of features of compatibility shims. We support document modes even through enterprise mode site list. You can select the IE 7 document mode, IE 5 document mode. We support IE 8 enterprise mode, IE 7 enterprise mode. So whatever mode works that unblocks your legacy line of business application in our modern browser, use that mode.
If it works in compatibility view, your work is done.
Yep.
Yeah. All right, next question. Yes, sir.
Yeah, actually I had two.
Okay.
First one with Edge and the fallback to IE 11. Will you have the ability to fall back to a third-party browser if that is your favorite?
The feature that we support is falling back to Internet Explorer 11.
Okay.
Yeah.
Second question is, with Flash being part of Edge, what's going to be your turnaround time for when vulnerabilities are found within Flash?
We have Flash built into Internet Explorer 10 and Internet Explorer 11 today on Windows 8 and Windows 8.1. So we work in conjunction with Adobe and Google and other browser providers to make sure that we have security updates coming out around the same time. Yeah. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Just a bit of clarification on that last bit that you said about enterprise mode and trying to use the document mode before even playing with enterprise mode.
Mm-hmm.
So if I have older IE 8 applications, and there are there are some that work with compatibility, some that don't work with compatibility mode. So the best way would be to edit that site list and just use the document mode part of it and leave the enterprise mode part empty for those applications?
That's correct. We suggest using the document modes first, and we'll be going into a lot more detail on Thursday morning, but the document mode section first, or doc mode section, and the enterprise mode or ME section second. And as I said, we'll be sharing a lot more information. We'll have some live demos, and we'll go into detail on Thursday. I do appreciate all your time. I thought it would take up the full 75 minutes, and we're a minute over. So thank you very much. Have a great show, everybody.